Good afternoon. Again, it's me, Jake, Azenquor, Roshane. Just Azenquor is fine. Alright, so this afternoon what we're looking at is some simple tips for better motion graphics, and I'm going to base this on a video that I saw in the week by Derek Liu. It's on Vimeo. It shows you 25 simple tricks for better motion graphics, and it's a really helpful video. He kind of goes through and just gives you really quick demonstrations of the different type of stuff you have out there. So I like looking at, for instance, here. It just gives you a quick run through of what is what. So what I'm aiming to do is actually just basing my tutorial on showing you how to achieve, if not all of them, at least most of them, using the default plugins that you get in After Effects CS5. So two things. I changed my background. It's pretty awesome. It's not one that I made, but you know, I like it. And God is awesome. So let's start. So we just open up After Effects real quick. Had it loaded already. So one of the things we're going to start out with is your gradients. And to start off, we just create a new composition. And there's multiple ways you can create compositions. Hit new composition, or you can go into the create new composition little button there. And from there you can set the size. Now depending on the size of the video you want to create, that's width and height, not the length, you can always check out the presets that they have, or you can even create your own custom width and height and even play around with the frame rate. I like leaving mine at NTSC-DV because it doesn't take that much time to render, and it's not like I'm going to be using this for film footage anyway. But I'm going to actually just set this to HDTV. Why not? Alright, so what we're doing is just setting up our time code, and our start time code is at 0. Duration is at 15 seconds, and the background color is going to be black. I like black. Alright, we can create the first composition and call it, for instance, gradients, right? Because we'll be looking at that. Now, this black background, for those of you who have never used After Effects before, is actually really just a placeholder for a color. It's actually really a transparent background. Right? You can't actually do anything with it. You can't edit it. You can't modify it unless you go up into the composition settings again. But you can't really change it inside the composition itself. What we'll have to use instead is actually solid. Now, solid is really the placeholder or a layer that pretty much takes up your composition size by default, which you can apply effects to kind of augment your other layers. So black solid is the name of ours. I'm going to change this to gray, and it's pretty cool because when I change the colors, you see the name change. Anyway, so gray is fine. Press OK. It's a really hideous gray if you don't like gray. So right now, as soon as I added this, two things happened. In your, you have a solid folder for all your solids. It's the same solid settings for that, and it also got added to your layers here. And of course, being in the layers, it also has its own little timeline here. So the first thing we want to do is apply a gradient, and there's two gradients in After Effects that I will be willing to go through, but the one I'm going to focus on today is the ramp, R-A-M-P. It's pretty much transition one color to another color, so it's really taking a maximum of 2 color values. So I'm just going to drag this onto our composition area here on the gray solid, and I can drop it here, or I can drop it here. Sometimes dropping it here can be more accurate, especially if you have a whole bunch of layers and you want to apply it to a particular layer. Now by default you get a black and white for your gradient. One of the other things you want to look at is, as soon as you apply an effect, you come over to beside the project window and you will see effects control. Now in the case you're not seeing an effects control, you can always go to window and just look for effects control right here. Okay, so you start of the ramp tells you a particular size, and this will be different based on the size of your composition. So you might have a smaller composition, it's going to give you a smaller size here. So let's look at that. If you click on start of the ramp, you have right here 2 numbers. One stands for your X value, one stands for your Y value. And if you want to just pinpoint where it is, you can always click on this little button here. And it kind of just shows you. And from there, you can actually move it to anywhere else you want. Now, in the linear ramp, whenever you move it, you can actually change the angle of that ramp. So notice the darker version is over here, the whiter version is over there. And you have the white area. You can always move it across. Now, I consider an effective gradient one that doesn't show you any solidity at all for one side, because you don't want to have a bare white and a bare black there. You kind of want them just as the gradient. So you can always play around with it till you get the desired effect. Now, my preference is using radial gradients, especially for backgrounds, because it gives me a nice little effect. And I like using the lighter part to be, for instance, like the source of the whole gradient. So if you see me looking here, I'll see a darker section starting out, and it gets more dark. Now, depending on what you want to create, you can always do it like this, or you can flip it around by changing the start color. And I'll just change this to that. And my end color I'm going to change to a slight tinge of green. Slight tinge of green. Right? So I'm going to have it up here. Probably change this to a little lighter green. Doesn't look too bad. And I press OK. Move this out. So I get something like this. Alright. So we now have a gradient, and we know how to kind of affect the gradient. Now, there are a few more options here. We know what each of these do already. Start of ramp pretty much gives you the position. You have the end of ramp, gives you a position. Color changes the colors, changing the shape of the ramp as well. You also have something called ramp scatter. Now, that's a very interesting setting there. What it does, it kind of gives you that, if you can see it, I'm hoping you can, it's going to give you a grainy effect, which can be very useful in certain cases, especially probably if you want a subtle moving background. That's not really the sharpest thing in the world, but kind of grainy like that. You can always increase it to the amount you want it to be. And currently my own is set at half resolution, so if I set that to full, you might see it a little better. So it gives you that grainy look right there. And if you don't want it, you can always just click on that, hit 0, and you get a smoother gradient. Now let's just add a few words to kind of experiment with the things that we can put a gradient on. So we'll have the word, I don't know, gradient. Why not? So I have a gradient here, the word gradient. To change my text settings, I can always go over to my character, probably increase the size. If I don't want to be left aligned, I can always go to my paragraph settings and change that to center. That way everything gets fixed up relatively neatly. Back to character. That is good. Right, sorry about that. WhatsApp. So let's continue. So let's apply a gradient to our word here, or ramp rather. Just drop that on there. We have this gradient. We can always play around with it as well. Right, if you want it to be a white to that, you can always do that. If you want it to be darker down here and a bit brighter up here, you can always play around with that as well. Right, now I might leave this at black to gray, or black to white, or whatever. And what I can do, probably to get this to be green, I can play around with not so much the color of the ramp, but I can always play around with the blending mode, probably to overlay, and I'll get something like that. Or I can probably play with a multiply, which is, come on, multiply, and I'll get something like that. This does come in handy, especially if you're going to have the background changing colors and you kind of want the above layers to kind of take on similar colors. So example, if I were to change this to a red and a red, the gradient kind of just matches it really well. So those are two ways you can use gradients. You can use them on layers. You can also use them on texts. You can pretty much use them on any layer at all. Now, something else to point out, gradients for the positioning, they take on positions based on the composition, not based on the layout so much. Because if I were to move this gradient further down, it's going to get darker based on my end of ramp position. If I move this up here, it's going to get lighter. Alright, and I can actually use it as like a transitional effect because I have the multiply here. When you're using multiply, white pretty much becomes transparent and black becomes darker. So if I were to play with the positioning, I'm going to just press P, and you can toggle P if you want to play with positioning. I'm just going to have it come down over a period of 4 seconds. And since I already have the time variable stopwatch on, I can always just hold shift and move it down, and I'll get my gradient sort of like that. And I'm going to just right click and choose keyframe assistant, and you have easy ease. And the shortcut is right there, F9. You can always hit that to get your easy ease in. What that's going to allow me to do is kind of just have this thing fade in and nicely and slowly. So that just ran previewed a while ago, and this is what it would look like. Alright, so that's how you use a simple gradient. And before I end this, I'm going to show you how to use a vignette, but I'm not going to use it inside this particular composition. I'm going to create a composition with a composition inside it. So what I'll do, I can do one of two things. I could always create a new composition, or I could pretty much drag this into that to get this to be a part of the new composition. But I'm just going to do it a simpler way. I'm going to create a new composition first, the same one. I'm going to call it vignette, and what I have is that. So I want the gradients composition inside it, as for instance my background, and it's going to play out just as the same way you saw it play out before. Now in the case where we had hit the solid, you know, the background solid, you'd have a transparent background working. So multiple ways of putting on vignettes. There's actually an effect called vignette, but it's an image preset. Let's see what that looks like, a vignette lighting. Let's drag that onto our composition, and what you get is it creates pretty much a ramp with a few settings on there that gives you the impression that there's a vignette around it, like so. Another way you could have done this, and I'm going to erase these effects, right, is click on our gradients, and you can probably draw an ellipse. Well, no, you first have to create a new solid black one. Drop that on there, press OK. Right now you have a black solid, and because this layer is selected, we can draw an ellipse as a mask on it, which kind of just shows you only that area where your solid would be. Now the vignette is actually black on the outside and showing whatever is on the inside. So you can actually look down here in your mask and choose invert it. Now it's not blurry, so we can actually just collapse this or expand this, and we'll get mask feather as an option. And you just increase that to the amount you want it to be. And if you think this is being too gradiented in, you can always play around the mask expansion to carry it in or carry it out, depending on what you want. And you can just experiment and really get what you want. So that's how you create a gradient and a vignette. Now I don't want the tutorial to be too long, so what I'm going to do is just save here and create a second tutorial that kind of explains how to use textures and some other stuff. Alright, so till then, take care and God bless.